All right. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Hope you're starting to recover from your after lunch nap that you took. And you're here for a great session. This is a really odd session, so let me explain it to you and introduce what we're going to be doing here. This is called the Extracurricular. It is a community content track that was organized by the community. It was community sourced. We selected the talks. We helped to improve the talks. We kind of groomed the talks and had all these great speakers submit. We had to choose them. And do a lot of prep to get this put together. It's a really interesting format. It's kind of a deep dive, longer format, and it's about having a conversation. Who's gone to like a Meet the Devs type session where it's just Q&A the whole time? How awesome are those? Really cool to just sit and talk. So what we're trying to do here is take those accidental conversations you have in the hallways at an event like this, where you bump into someone, you have a really interesting conversation, and turn those into a session that you can actually sit and attend, which is a little bit of a weird mission, but we're trying to accomplish it. And we think we've got the format pretty nailed. So what we're going to do here is essentially have a really mega Q&A session together. We're going to have a conversation as a group. You can see the room set up kind of in a particular way, and we're trying to have a discussion where everyone's participating, audience, panelists, and the speaker. And so what we're going to do is have kind of a 20, 25 minutes set up from the speaker, sort of a presentation, but it's about starting a conversation. And the real meat of the session that we're about to have is the Q&A that comes after. We have a long block of Q&A, like an hour of Q&A. We're just going to really get into a sticky subject and dig deep and talk about it. And that's the real opportunity here, is take somebody that's done something that you would like to do and just pick apart their brain for an hour and ask them questions and go deeper and deeper and deeper. These are not beginner talks. These are technical content. It's advanced content. And that's on purpose, because at some point, you hit a ceiling where it's hard to learn unless you talk to somebody that's done it and ask them questions to kind of tease out the nuances of that conversation. So that's what we're trying to do here with this set of material. So there are a series of sessions called the Extracurricular. We're in the Extracurricular room. We have 7 sessions. I hope you really enjoy it. It's different, and I hope that you like that it's different and that we keep doing more of this stuff. My name is Chuck Liddell. I'm one of the organizers. I really appreciate that you're here. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it into the first section. We have a little bonus content here at the beginning, kind of like a warm-up act before the headliner. We're going to do 2 quick talks, we call them. They're 5-minute talks, no Q&A. There's 2 different people going to get up there and talk about something cool that they've been involved in or done. And they're going to show you something cool and get off the stage. We'll do 2 of those, then we'll get into the main session. All right? So our first quick talk is Roan Bear. Hear ye, those gathered here today to witness a bold hypothesis proven true. Join us to experience the birth of the impossible dashboard filter. Disclaimer, may cause nausea, rashes, and occasional metadata outbreaks.
Behold, a dashboard. Wait, it's supposed to be visible.
Oh.
Behold, a non-visible.
And so it is.
A dashboard referencing 3 different objects: campaign members, opportunities, and accounts, filtered by a field called employee segment. Same data type, formula text data type. Unfortunately, this dashboard was presented to executives, and they're never happy with what you give them. They want to be able to filter this dashboard by the employee segment field. So we go ahead and create the filter. It's not available. It's not available to filter, even though it's the same data type. Gosh darn it. Now I'm going to fail for my employees. So I sat there, had a couple drinks, and I thought to myself, what if the problem is the filter interface and not the dashboard engine? So I decided I would test my hypotheses. So the first thing I did is I created a single component with the filter that I needed. And then I went ahead and went into the metadata. This is my original dashboard. You can see it's talking about kind of the nature of the dashboard, and then it has my single component, and it has my grouping fields. And then I looked at my single component dashboard, and here is my filter with all my fields, and then end filter. And what I did is I also looked at the component itself, and I found right here the filter. And you'll notice what's interesting is it uses dot notation. So I thought, well, let me go ahead and look at my main dashboard. Let me clone it and see if I can just copy in the metadata of the filter and the filter within the components, and will that work? So I went ahead and I copied my clone dashboard and I pasted the filter in. And then within each component, I added the filter column. I want to make a note here that it's not always going to be dot notation. If you'll notice my groupings here, this is a standard field called campaign type. So standard fields are not necessarily going to be rendered as dot notation. So that's a good reason to like do some test filters on each object report that you want to do. And here's my opportunity report with employee segment, and here is my account with employee segment. I loaded it up to the org, and behold, the impossible filter. If I change my components, if I change my report display components, it doesn't delete that metadata. That metadata is safe. The downside is that, oh, I have another two minutes. Well, the downside is that it has to be maintained by an administrator, but it does let you present to unreasonable executives that filter dashboard they want. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're working with 3 filters, they're going to be on the dashboard one after the other. So you'll have 3 sets of dashboard filters. And there's no field definition here. It's strictly the filters. And the order in which within each component that you present your filtered code will be applied towards the order in which the filters are listed in the beginning of the dashboard. And also, I had another thought, but I lost it. Anyway, that's it. Ta-da!
Thank you, Roan. All right. Our second quick talk, and then we'll get into our main talk, is Sri Kalagani. Sri is a software engineer at Salesforce and a Chico State alum, currently on the journey to CTA. He is an avid blogger and technology activist who believes in knowledge sharing for a better tomorrow. Sri holds constant love for sarcasm, soccer, food, cars, meditation, and adventure sports.
Thank you, Chuck. Aloha, everyone. And this is my second extracurricular quick talk. Thanks for that. Okay, so about 4 months back when I visited Tesla office, when I spoke with the sales rep, she showed me all my information in Salesforce CRM. So they are having a customer data inside Salesforce, and with Tesla API, you can access the car data. So my vision was to not worry about the service of my car, and I wanted to automate it using the Salesforce platform. And I wanted to do all the actions related to my car from the Salesforce platform. So with that thought, and with the quest to learn Lightning Web Components, I have built this mobile app called Tesla Cloud. So this is the login screen. So once you log in with your Tesla username and password, you go to this, you log into the app, and then you basically see your vehicle information, which is an API call to Tesla API. And then we pretty much have the entire data written by Tesla, basically about the car state, the car is in the driving state or not. And then once I have the data, once I have the access token, I also know the location of where my car is. Right now, it's in Dallas. So I'm using all the out-of-the-box Lightning web components. I'm using Lightning Map. I'm using out-of-the-box unit testing framework provided by LWC. So right now, when I say unlock, my car is remotely unlocked from here. And when I say lock, my car is locked. So that's it, as simple as that. And I can even ask my car to back up and go friend, all with as simple as one single API call. So that's tremendous. Now let's dive right into the code. So when I started this app, so I know that I'm going to make multiple API calls. So I know that I need some wrapper classes to have that data in. So Tesla auth is basically to store the access token and refresh tokens, and Tesla response is basically all the data I get from the Tesla API response. So, and get Tesla is basically the call which I have to make. So to start with, the initial call should be made to the Tesla API for an access token. So there are multiple verticals here which are open for the discussion once I put this code on GitHub. One is, how do we want to, serve the client ID or client secret ID? Shall we do with custom metadata? So that's a question there. And once we have the access token, we are going to put it in the header. Now, once we are putting it in the header, do we want to use name credentials there? That's a question there. So, and also one interesting thing I thought about was when your customer is entering the username and password through a login screen, as I showed you here, you're basically sending the information through a header. So even if we encode it into base 64, we can decode it back and we can easily access the credentials. So what kind of security auth mechanism should we use here to save those basic auth credentials? So that's a good question for a conversation. That being said, I want to show you my Lightning Web components. So the first one is called Talking Tesla. Sorry if you don't like the name, but it's basically the component which you're seeing. I basically call this the parent component. So I have 3 components. I'm kind of encapsulating one into each other. So the main component is the Talking Tesla. So based on your car color written by the API call, it basically shows the image dynamically, the one you see here, and the lock and unlock is also within the parent component. So that's a second API call for the action. And once we have that, we are basically embedding. So the battery is another component which is embedded. So that being said, there is no development without unit testing. So I just wanted to play with Jest, which is a unit testing framework for LWC. So I have written this very teeny-weeny unit test just to demonstrate to the folks here. LWC test data, so we don't need any data. So this is a basic unit test class to test a Lightning Web component. So here I'm testing whether my component has one single Lightning layout item element or not. I'm basically asserting that. So let me run it right now. So when I run this, it's basically querying the shadow DOM, and it asserts that, hey, you're having one Lightning layout item. And my test is successful. This way, we can also test the Lightning components while we are building it. And if you have a good unit test, your Lightning Web components work perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sri. So now we're going to get into our main talk, which is admin-configurable Lightning components equals empowered admins. So our main speaker is going to be Jessica Reif. Come on down. Jessica is a senior software developer at American Fidelity, working exclusively on the Salesforce platform. With 8 of her 11 years of development experience on the Salesforce platform, she has expanded her skill set from C#, .NET, to Apex and Visualforce, and now to JavaScript and Lightning development. She has the Platform App Builder, Platform Dev 1, and is actively working towards the Platform Dev 2. With 2 littles at home, Jessica works hard to maintain a healthy work-life balance. In addition to her family, she enjoys showing her Chinese-crested dogs and riding horses on the weekends. All right. All right, and as our moderator for this session, we have Marisa Lopez. Come on down. Marisa is a senior business development manager at Attain and Salesforce MVP, has been connecting nonprofit leaders with solutions to transform their organizations for over a decade. She is an innovator, technology therapist, mother, and ocean advocate. Marisa is also the president of Amplify, an organization that empowers underrepresented individuals to be fearless leaders in technology. Okay. And playing the part of panelist number 1, we have David Giller. David is a former attorney who is currently a Salesforce MVP, trainer, consultant, blogger, author, Salesforce user group leader, and CEO at Brainiate. David helps organizations to make Salesforce easy by training employees, identifying areas to improve the existing Salesforce configuration, and sharing best practices to help organizations get the most out of the Salesforce platform. Whew. All right. Panelist number 2, Dan Appelman. Dan is a Salesforce MVP, the author of the book Advanced Apex Programming, webmaster of SearchTheForce.com, and CTO at Full Circle Insights, a Salesforce ISV partner. All right, I introduce you to your crew for the next hour and a bit. So just a quick refresher on format. This is a lengthy session. This is about having a conversation. We're all going to kind of get in here and tease apart this knotty problem. Jessica's going to spend about a third sort of setting us up for the conversation, giving us all the context of this problem that she solved. And then we're going to move into sort of panel questions and then open it up for audience questions, right? So it's really all about kind of going back and forth and understanding the shape of this very interesting technical challenge that you've had to solve. So take it away.
Hey, hi guys, like Chuck said, my name is Jessica Reif. And I work for American Fidelity, which is kind of an insurance-ish company. So one of the things that we do is that we have very large forms. And how many of you guys spend time adding forms or removing or adding fields or removing fields to very large forms? Oh, I'm not alone. Yes. So, okay. Another problem that we have is that we also need to change requiredness. So how many times do you come back and say, oh, well, this field wasn't required, and now we want it required? Or, oh, hey, this field's been required for 4 years, but hey, we don't need it like that anymore, so we're not going to make that required anymore. And all of that requires you to do code work. You have to go back in. You have to go into then Visualforce page, go into your Lightning component. You have to remove that required aspect. Make sure everything doesn't break. How many of you guys have fragile Visualforce pages? Yes. They're not fun. So during this time, we were looking at revamping our forms. And also, we brought in a contractor. And sometimes when we bring contractors, we're like, oh, great. But we actually got a really awesome contractor, and one of the things that he suggested that we started using is field sets. Now, how many of you guys actually use field sets? So field sets are cool, and you can code with them. That wasn't me. I didn't know you could. But our awesome contractor, who is actually here in the audience today, is Mr. Luke Freeland, which we snatched him up. Yay. So he introduced these field sets to our admins, and they all go, ooh, yes, make it do it. And we go, yay, okay. So we started off this journey. Now these fragile forms that they want to be able to add and remove fields to, they want to be able to add and remove them to the field set, and it just magically works all by itself. So we set out to solve that problem. So how did we kind of segue in to start doing that? So, all right. So the first question becomes, what is on our field set? How can we get that data to us? So we're going to need a few things. We're going to need to know the object with which that we are going to be pulling our field set from, and then what fields actually live in that field set and how we're going to be able to pull those in. So let me show you. Whoops. This is moving very slowly. Enter. So wow. Wow. Okay, hold on, guys. This is moving kind of slow. Come on. Dum, 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 dum.
Yeah, Dev Console.
Yay, Dev Console. Yeah. And the sweet typing. Come on. Sorry. I fixed this earlier, but okay. So up here, when it catches up, so what we're doing is we're pulling in some describes, and we pull in the describes, and now we're going to pull in all the field sets that are associated to that account object that we pulled the describe for. So let's see what it brings back to us. So now we have all of the fields that live on all the field sets that we have. So in my demo, we only have one field set, so it's only pulling the fields from the one field set. So it shows you some interesting information. We can pull in our field path, if it's required on the database, if it's required in the field set. So we have all of this information that we can kind of start building our form with. So we go through. Now we need to take it a step further and find out, or now that we have all those fields, now let's go in and pull in all the describes for those fields. So let me painfully change this for you. And then get rid of the bottom one. Wow, okay, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Okay, thank you for being a little patient. So now we're going to go through and pull in the describes for our fields that are on each field in the field set. So if we execute that, and show in our cool debug stuff. So now we have even more information on our field. We have the type of field that it is, which is important when you're trying to determine what component you're going to build. We have, we get relationship information, we get help text information, and we get a lot of stuff related to the field. So now we can go through and try to build in all of this information that we pull about these fields and start meaningfully trying to display them, which is what we're about to do. So, ew, internet. So what do I want? Okay, so here in Salesforce, pull up my account. So we have a cool, just a regular account, just like you guys see every day. So we're going to pull in our first set of fields in a few minutes when it's thinking about it. Come on. Okay, so we have a field set form, and it's going to show our fields. And that's awesome, right? Yay. We have our fields. Now, you see that all of these fields are required, right? So if I try to save my form, I give it a little test, and I save it. It shouldn't save it, right? It should fail, puke all over. No, we have required fields. We're not going to save. And it does in a minute. Maybe. Well, anyhow, since that's taking a long time. So it saves, but it doesn't check, it doesn't give you any validation for your required fields. So it's just going to save it, it's going to refresh our view, and everything's going to work how we don't want it to. So that's not going to solve our problem, right? So we still have a really big problem. Now we can add and remove fields to our field set, but we still need to be able to check if it's required. We need to be able to follow our business requirements. So let me close this guy, since it's working poorly. So I meant to go over this earlier. So a lot of the stuff that you saw in the execute anonymous code, we have living here. So the things that we need to be able to build our field set, we need our name of the object, so we can pull that in dynamically, and then we need the name of our field set. So this is kind of where we're going through and building all of the kind of background information that we're going to use to spit out to our web, not our Lightning Web component, to our component. So just kind of helps us get the details, get our field describes, things that a lot of the boilerplate code that I already showed you. So one of the things that we're going to need to package this all up to send our component is a wrapper class. So we take our fields, all that information that we got on the field, and we're going to stick it in a wrapper class that's going to have information that we're going to want to output to our component whenever we do our server call. And it's going to package it up into a pretty little package that we're going to use to output the information that we need. So here in our version 1 of the field set, of our field set form, we just have where we take in some information. We take in our record ID, we take in our field set name, we're going to take in an object name, and then the fields. Well, we're not going to take that in. We're going to get that. So we need to give it our field set name and our object name. So then we initialize it, we go out, we get our details, and we are actually sending that information in. And when we send in the record ID, it's going to use the field set form, and it's going to query it with those fields that live in the field set form. So we already have that. That's already going to be packaged out. We're going to send it back out to the form, and that's where we had the component show up in our action. And wait, now this is where the magic happens. And I don't know about you guys, I might be the only one who's guilty of this. So when we started out on this journey of trying to use a field set form, I do what I assume everybody else does, and I went out to the Stack Exchange. Like, hey, has anybody else done this? And this is where we kind of came up with this code. So somebody had started this. Hey, yay. So we got excited, and we start trying to implement this. So we're implementing it, we're putting it in. So this is a configuration map that's basically going to take that type that we pulled from our field, from our field set form and built it into the field. And then we're going to start mapping that to components. So instead of going in and manually coding in, oh, I want a UI input field, or I want a UI input, and this is all the stuff that I want in it, we're going to start dynamically building all of that information based on this config map. So we can throw it in, we can give it extra, if you have a phone number, we want to use an input phone instead of just an input. So we go through and start building this form a larger form full of smaller components that we're building out. So we go through each of our field that came back, we loop through, and we start giving it the attributes that it needs. So we're starting to give it a label, whether or not if it's required. We pull in our reference to the record. We have our field path, which is our API name to the field, and that's how we're going to pull it back in, any additional classes that we need. We're going to push them all into this array, and then we're going to run create components based on that array, set it to our body, boom, that's where we get our form. So that's great, right? And that's kind of where we started, and we said, hey, look, here's our field set forms. They're like, oh, well, we want them to honor it being required. And we go, oh, okay, back we go. So this was kind of where we started out with our version 1. We were able to accomplish our problem of taking the field set, the fields that they want, and then put them out into a field. And then they start asking for more things. They're like, oh, that's cool, right? Now we want help text to be dynamic. Now we want it to honor it being required, and we want error validation. So that is where, oh, I also forgot to show you. So all of that happens, and hey, maybe that's why it didn't work. See, I saved this stuff, and then it didn't. Save. So maybe I can show it to you now. So we take all that and we throw it back in, and this is all that we have in our actual parent component. So it goes out, queries the record, so all of that special piece of code, it's all in that one little line. So it's pretty cool, right? I thought so. So, okay, let's move into version 2. So now, you know how I said we wanted to get into having to show dynamic help text. So we started doing that. Now the first bit of our second form, we're going to start taking in some error, making an error class and showing some error stuff. We've got some extra methods that are going to control when we load the component. Another problem that we had with the first version of the component is that the record wasn't bound to the parent component. Instead, it was bound to the Fieldset form itself. So when it took in the record ID. So now, whenever we wanted to save our form, we had to save it directly off of the Fieldset form as opposed to the parent itself. So when we went through and solved that problem, we don't pass in the record ID. Now we pass in the entire record. So when we started doing that, we had a problem where when we load the component, it wasn't loading initially it wasn't loading the Fieldset form with the record from the init. So we would have to go in and load it after the fact with the record that we went to the server and pulled back. So now we have some more methods for validating and showing our validation messages as well. So this is where our load on init attribute comes in, and if we want to load whenever it's initialized, hey, yeah, if not, we're going to wait and do it later. So a lot of this stuff, we're running our validations, and then in our helper, now our config map has changed a little bit. So remember where I said that our users wanted to show help text? So what we did was that we started making our own Lightning components that we use for our inputs. So I'll show you one of those. Now, many of these are going to be in the same, they're going to have the same format. So we opened it up, and we put it in a container. And our container is going to hold a lot of the important information that apply to our field that is added to several different fields as we go along the way. And then, so this is all sits up here. We show our help text. We can put it in. We can show or hide our label and put it in different ways that we want to configure it as we go. And then in our input, pretty much just holds our Lightning input. And then that's going to feed in all the attributes that we have coming in from what we need to send it from our config map. So let's go back to our config map. So now this is where we're going to use our special data input, we're going to use our special Lightning input, and start giving it more information to our field set that we want to use for our fields. And we can use this for better error handling. We can start honoring that requiredness and kind of start to deliver a field set form that does what our administrators expect it to do. So a lot of this is the same. So our demo 2, it looks much the same. We're going to initialize it with our account ID. We're going to go out to the server. We're going to pull in our account, and then we're going to put our account into a field set form, which we're not initializing here because we're going to load it after we've loaded, so in the callback. So here is where we're now loading our record, and we're finding our demo, and we're loading the component. Okay, so let's show that. So we still have our demo version 1. We still have the information that we want. So now if we try to save, now we have field validation. We're not able to save, so now our administrators are happy. So now they can say, oh, well, I can now just set required in my field set, and they can no longer save. So yay, that's awesome, right? So some of the problems that we've faced, that we've kind of come across, is that our administrators want to show and hide fields dynamically. So how many of you guys have to do that? Yeah, it's kind of a pain, right? So, and they want to do it in field sets. Well, we've not been able to figure out how to dynamically show and hide the fields within the field set. So I've kind of been thinking about this problem to where each of our component is going to have the aura ID of the API field name. So maybe we can go through and find it, find our field set that we're dealing with, go in and find the field set or the field that we want, and then throw it a class to show or hide. So I think that's something cool to try. Maybe we could, because the current process that we have now is if we want to show or hide a field, we have to we can do it by show or hiding a field set. So now we give them this ability, but now our big field set that we have is now smaller. So, oh, you want to show it between this field and this field. So now we build our field set to this field, build in our additional field set that we want to show or hide, and then we continue our form down here. So now we're looking at 3, 4, 5 sets of field set forms that we're trying to validate and show, see if it exists, and then we're going to validate it, see if it works, and then we're going to, either disable it and show other things with it. So that's where we kind of started moving into our version 3 to closer to what we have now today. So this gives us a working form, version 2. Oops, another 5. We save it, it refreshes, so we gave them what they want. So now let's go in. I'll say there's another problem that we have as we come up into working with the field sets. So we can load our record either by providing a record, or we can ask it to load it using the queried ID. So when we do that, it's going to go through and take all the fields that live on the field set, and it's going to query them. So if we pass in the record, it's not going to do that anymore. It's assuming that we have all the information. And that's great, except when you have a related field in your field set and you didn't query it. Like if you go through and query all the creatable fields for the object, that's great, you have everything that's available there, but now you still don't have that relation data, and you have to go in and manually put in, I know I'm going to need this field, which still, if the administrator goes in and adds a related field, it's not going to show up. So that's going to be a problem that we face, that we really, we can alleviate by getting the queried record, but it's not what I would say a seamless experience yet, where they can fully just go through and add stuff to their field set and it just works, which is what we're aiming to have. So I don't know if you guys have any suggestions on how to fix that. That'd be great.
I wrote a thing for that.
Yeah?
So there's something that's open source that when I worked at Financial Force I wrote called Query Factory, and it was specifically designed to solve this problem of you have multiple field sets, you need to merge them into a single SOSL query. fflib_query factory. I think there's like 2 or 3 dependencies it has, but it's pretty isolated from the rest of the repo, and is specifically designed to let you build a query from a bunch of field sets.
That's nice.
It actually has a method called select fields, and you pass in a field set, and it adds all the fields from that field set, including related object fields, to your query.
Nice. What about the problem that we have with the showing and hiding fields dynamically? Does anybody have any suggestions for that? Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, so they're recording, so we want to be able to pull up what you're saying so everybody else can hear.
I was wondering if instead of using field sets, if you looked at using custom metadata types. So because custom metadata types, you can have references to fields, so you could have like a custom metadata type that has, and you could have multiple custom metadata types where they are related to each other. So I'm just kind of like, you could have a custom metadata type that represents your field set, a related custom metadata type that lists all of the fields that you need, and then even below that, you could have some criteria that say, show this one, don't show this one. So you'd have to be refactoring a lot of your stuff, but I think you put a lot more logic into your custom metadata types. Is much more like an object at that point.
Really, that's. Yeah,
They don't support
Could you use the
custom.
mic, please?
They don't support compound fields. You said. Right. So
Could you use the mic if you're speaking, please? Because now
I'm just going to relay what Peter's saying.
that'd be perfect.
So yeah, I think I know what you're saying. So you're saying like you can't just say billing address in your field set. You have
Oh,
to
yeah.
say
yeah,
billing street, billing city, billing, etc. Right? So you can't select them at all. Okay. So I know he wants to talk. So that's all. Custom metadata types.
So that's something I'll need to explore because I've read a little bit about it, but it's not something I've actually gone in and used much of yet. So I still have one more piece of my demo, which kind of brings us to where we're at today. And I'll show you a little bit about the show and hide that we have now. And there are other things that our administrators have asked for, and that's for the ability to autosave the record. How many of you guys have been asked to autosave after they leave a field? Just me? Oh, there are some of you. So Salesforce typically saves at the click of a button, and then they go through and they do all their validations via their button click, right? So our administrators didn't want to do that. They wanted their field people to be able to put in information, and it just saves automatically. So if they forget it, they leave it, whatever, they don't have to come back and re-put in data. So we needed to be able to know whenever you're leaving the field in the field set to go back and save it. So now we're going to throw some events back and forth that are going to send like your record information, your object name, the field name, the field value. So we're going to pass that back to our parent component. So let's see if I can show that to you guys in a meaningful fashion. So demo 3, for our field set form, this is closer to a real world scenario. So we're going to send in our field set name, our object name is opportunity. We don't want it to load, and whenever we determine that our fields are disabled, we want them to not be editable. So we're setting our form, we'll come back to that one. Hold up. So now, when we're saving our record, nope, that's not the one I wanted. Just kidding. In this form visibility. So this is where we're going through and handling our event, and we're pulling information off the event that we're firing in the field set form to go through and check, hey, is this field, the type field? Is that what the field API name is called? Is this the value? If this is the value, now we're going to show that extra field set that's going to have that information in it. And in our current field set form. So here down in our helper, we're going to fire a value change event. And this is where we're going to pull in all of that information off the field set. Or we have an event in the field itself that's going to throw an event to the field set. The field set's going to handle it, and then it's going to give it more information that we need, and it's going to throw it back out to the parent component. And that's where we're going to handle it to do extra stuff here in the helper, in the controller, that we're going to be able to autosave if we want to autosave, if we want to show or hide based on a specific value. So we have that ability to do that now. So I can show you that. So here in this giant create opportunity button. So we're going to give it great opportunity name. We're going to give it a stage. Now, if you're very familiar with, we're going to give it close one stage. If you're familiar with opportunities, which I assume you all are, this probably shouldn't pass. It shouldn't save. Can anybody tell me why it shouldn't save? Quiz time. Closed state. There's no closed state. So if we put in our downgrade, this is where our extra field set comes in. They can add or remove fields to their field set, but like I said, it doesn't, now that we have 2 field sets. And then this is an example of where we have our help text. It's looking good and great. So now we want to create it. So it's going out to the server. It tries to save the record. And why isn't it working? Well, I don't know why it's not working today. Yay. But it's going to throw up an error in the top that says, hey, you can't do this because you don't have the close date. So we can go into, for time's sake, I added a 2. Now let's refresh. And now we have our close date here. And that's, how easy the administrators can go through and change your field set. So they just go in and add it, and it just automatically works. Another would be great amount. Yeah, I'm going to change that. Now it's accepted our opportunity, and now we're disabling our input because we don't want them to modify this one anymore because it's created. It's, use your imagination on how it can be applied to you. So that kind of opens. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts?
Dan, David?
Okay, so the first thing that was a question is, did you give any thought, I didn't see in the code, to field level security?
Yes, no.
Oops. Your turn.
I think, well, with field level security, whenever you're building it, if it's not applicable, it's not going to be queried. So it doesn't get returned in the query, so it's not going to show you kind of what you want. So.
Yeah, I've never used field sets before, but I'm assuming that with field level security, if based on your
It's based
role
on your
profile, et cetera, you're
Yeah.
not able to see a certain field.
Right, it's not going to show it to you.
The only question is if that field is required and you can't see it.
So I do have
Did
some
you have
bad
something
news.
to say?
Yeah, I do have some bad news for you. Field sets will include the field even if you don't have access to it. And Visualforce at the UI layer would hide the fields on the UI for you. So if you put like an output field or an input field element, it would render it as empty if you didn't have field level access. But Lightning doesn't do that for you. So it's very likely you are letting people see and possibly edit fields that they don't actually have access to on their profile.
Wow.
I'm assuming it's with sharing, it's on the controller, so they're actually not going to see the field, or no, wait,
With sharing,
never
like
mind, they're still going to
sharing,
see the
not field
field.
level though.
You're right, they're still going to see the field.
So there are a
They won't
couple of
see
choices
the
that could be
data.
done to solve that. But
I think we have a really good blog article forming right here.
just to rain on your parade, you
Oh.
should audit your field level security
Yes.
or add a solution that uses
Yeah,
it. And
I know that they're very particular about their security, so it's not often that they'll let it go through.
That said, I believe there's
Yes.
all kinds of new features coming in Apex in summer that are going to make it a lot easier to do this, which I'm very excited about.
Some of it was released in this latest release, where it would show up in insufficient, like if you append a keyword into your query, it's going to show up in insufficient fields or insufficient privileges.
But that'll just blow things up. But there's also the
Yes.
is set or is, what is it?
so there's a new method that's in open pilot in summer, so you can't use it in production orgs yet, called security strip inaccessible. And I did a session on it this morning. The recording should be up.
Chris is making it better for us and easier.
Yes.
Do you have the link to that recording?
The recording isn't up yet, but I did actually tweet the slides and some sample code and a live demo.
There you go.
CA_Peterson on Twitter for anybody who cares.
Sweet, because we're always evolving this. This isn't the end all. Every time we go through and are building a new requirement for our admins, we usually have to add something else. Like, oh, whoops.
Well, the good news is you're already capturing the data because I saw that you've got the is accessible and you've got the described information. So it's really just a matter of a flag that says when you see it's not accessible, just don't create the component, and
Right.
that should solve all the problems.
And there's, like you said, there's a piece for is accessible. It's not going to add it to that field to kick out to be created in the field set if it's not accessible. So, see, I forget things. It's big. It does a lot of things.
Do you have other questions?
I have a question. Considering that I have not used field sets before, I guess the question is whether you are an admin or a developer, what is the appropriate use case to identify, this might be a good scenario to utilize field sets?
For us, it came around to where we were probably monthly, we were adding a field for a requirement, like the requirements change often. So our forms are like a living thing, like a living, breathing dragon sometimes. And they're like, oh, we need to add this field. So now we have to take adding this field to have to use deploy or development resources. So it's going to take time to where the developer has to go through and add it. Now the admins have to go through, or we have to go through our change management process where it has to be reviewed, it has to be deployed, it has to go through all the steps. So that's going to take time. And then the admins have to go through and verify what we've done, do their testing, do QA testing, and then eventually it makes it out and our customers are happy.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that it's appropriate to use field sets when we have a logical grouping of fields that are typically used together as some type of to put a wrapper around a bunch of fields.
Yeah, and I would look at it to where if you've got this set of fields that we're looking at and they change a lot. So, and when they change a lot, that's when we need to start looking at, we're spending so much of our maintenance time doing all of these changes to fields that how can we make this better? How can we make it easier on our admins to where they can just go through and use our clicks, not code method?
Love it. Thanks.
Any ISV partners in the audience? This is another great use of field sets is if you have to do some configuration, Chris is nodding, you want to configure fields that are going to appear on a Visual Force page or that you're going to be using for something, and you don't want to write a whole bunch of complex field selection infrastructure. You can dynamically read field sets from Apex. So you can just say, oh, just create a field set with this name, and you can override whatever we're doing. So it's a great ISV configuration option as well.
But one really important thing if you're an ISV, if you package a field set and you want the customer to have access to a standard field, you must put it in the package. They cannot add it to that field set in their installed org. You will be very sad if you do not remember.
Right. This is why dynamic access, right? You don't ship the field set. You just query and say, have they created a field set of this name? And if so, I can read it in Apex. But you don't want to actually package the field set.
I mean, maybe. But most people, it's easier if it's there in terms of, I'm going to get your point, but it's easier in some ways if you can say, there's a field set, it's documented. Because you may want to limit some of the stuff that you're putting in there. Because you may not want them to access certain standard fields as well. So there may be, but the typical scenario is you just forget. So yes, I agree if you have a dynamic field set, but if you are putting a field set in your package, be sure to add on campaign, contacted account. Add the custom fields the customer might need.
Can you use a mic, please? Sorry. Thank you so much.
Also, as an ISV, you want to package your fields that are custom to your application in the field set while also allowing the customer to be able to extend with their custom fields. That's another reason why you may want to package a field set in your app.
I also think the good part about the field sets is that we can look for the certain name of the field set, but it can be dynamic too. So you can guide them, hey, we want to use this field set, and if you want to add it to this form and make customizations to it, we can look at all the field sets that live on the record or on the object. So you can go through and check if it's there, like you were saying.
If you have it is panelist question, but if it seems like there's some burning questions in the audience, so it's totally fine to walk up to the mic or just get in queue up if you'd like.
Hiya. So from the gist of what I got.
Can you step up a little bit?
Oh, sorry. Now? Good? Yeah.
Yes.
So the gist of what I've got, you've got your wrapper form component, and then you're dynamically creating all these input components for every item in the field set.
Yes.
Just be what I think, from what if memory serves, when you move on to Lightning Web Components, right now you can't dynamically create components.
Well, that's
so
a bummer.
that approach won't work for now. I think they're working on that, but right now they don't have that.
Yeah.
So.
I think
That's
we were
why,
asked.
despite what the world says, we're not all going to Lightning Web Components.
Did you? Yeah.
No. Go ahead.
Yes.
Do you want to keep taking audience questions, or do you want to ask some panel stuff?
Do we have more panelist questions?
Unless you have a better answer to that one, because you are an expert on Lightning Web Components.
Lightning Web Components, you can't dynamically create components. They're based on a standard that's very static. Like the W3 standard for web components is very static, and they don't want to fight that very much right now.
Can you step up to the mic?
Wow. you called me out, and you should have, and good on you. Yeah, so I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So you may have to use Aura for dynamic stuff. Jessica, a question for you. One of the things that I really like about this conversation that you're having with us is this idea of going to another layer of design, where you're not just building components for sort of a one-off use case, but you're building a layer of abstraction where you're sort of empowering the admins to be able to control the field sets to get what they want. Parts of this feel like you're starting to reinvent the wheel, right? Like someone suggested custom metadata types to replace field sets, because field sets you can't add custom fields to, right? You can't add a is dynamic Boolean to it, right? It's pretty static in what you can do with a field set. But then you're sort of reinventing field sets with custom metadata types. And then you have this field set, and you're kind of reinventing page layouts a little bit. So how do you navigate sort of the design side of when do you use this? And what are you sort of getting, and what are you giving up when you move to sort of a custom field set form style?
So the great part about that is that we're not roped into just using this layout that you see here. One of the things that we can do is we can change all the styling with it. So if we want to split out to a 2-table format, we've done that. So you can do that. We can go through and kind of change our layout here as we want to do it. And then we can also go in through and add custom attributes that are going to change kind of the way our fields behave, or not really behave, but how they look. Like if you want a different label, if you want a different checkbox design, we're able to do that. So we go through and use these custom attributes, and then we'll go through and overwrite some of the attributes that we had in our field set and be able to kind of start changing this up. And you'll see a bit in the layer or in the field set form, we start passing in like all these class attributes. Like, hey, we want it to fit into here. We want it to look like this. So then we can start giving it that layer of customizations for the look and feel, how we want it as well. So we're not roped into just this main look. And we've had requests for, well, I want the label to the side, so it's kind of a compact or a horizontal layout. Or I want it, 2 columns, like I said, or 3 columns. We've kind of done that and used a lot of different ways to display our form, like our field set form. Does that answer your question? Maybe?
It's a big question.
It's a big question.
Right. Jessica, very good presentation. My question to you is, when you thought about using field sets for this, what were the other options you were thinking of, and why did you not go with them? One, and do you think this is futuristic? Like, as we go along, like with all the updates coming in, do you think using field sets is futuristic? Now, moving to even LWC.
That's a good question. So to answer your question about why we chose it, so I didn't really know a whole lot about field sets before or use them. So that was the option that was presented. And like Luke had used field sets before in the past, and he's like, hey, what about field sets? And we all go, ooh, that's cool. And then that's kind of where we went. Like we just went straight there. We didn't really look at a bunch of the different options that are available to use, like the ones that the other guy was talking about. Yes.
So, just to expand on that, we're on some tight deadlines.
Yes.
And as other people mentioned, there's other ways to store metadata and manage that. And to make stuff admin friendly, we wanted to leverage out-of-the-box functionality as much as possible. So Fieldset's had native support. You can go into the setup as an admin and already kind of manage that without having developers build, prettier interfaces to manage that outside of what we are trying to build. So we wanted to leverage existing functionality as much as possible and build like a minimal viable product to build our feature set in a flexible way, given the requirements at the time. We built this about 2 years ago when Lightning was relatively new at the time. We didn't have like Lightning record edit form and things like that. So that's why we had to build out a lot of this infrastructure ourselves at the time, because Salesforce hadn't provided a lot of these other great Lightning components, our components, yet. So that's why, in terms of future, we would maybe want to like explore like page layout forms, where like today, like we have various like section field sets that kind of drive like, oh, for section A, here's the field set to use there, kind of like typically in a one column form with different sections. But now that, I think it was last year in summer, Salesforce and the Apex side was like, hey, now you can query page layout information and get literally all the structure in a nice format, and kind of build that into your UI very easily. So that's one kind of UI layout option. I know there's like the UI API, I haven't really dug into that, and other things like that. And of course, you could obviously build out a lot more infrastructure around custom metadata, custom objects. I mean, there's lots of different ways to store your custom metadata. But then you got to obviously build the infrastructure, the management for that. I mean, a lot of times, when we're building these custom features for admins, we got to make it easy for them to administer and manage these things too. Instead of just like, oh, I got to go create a record and then save that and create all the child records, and you might have a really big object graph, and just using regular like list views and stuff like that, it can be really cumbersome and time intensive to do that. So you really want to make sure that you provide the infrastructure to make that really easy to manage. So I know it was long-winded, but usually it comes down to time constraints and just the capabilities at the time. And over time, these are living things. So trying to redesign them for newer capabilities just comes down to time and budget kind of consideration.
Yeah, and you'll, I don't know if I gave you the opportunity to notice, but like this was before Salesforce had really given you good pick list capabilities. So we've rolled in our own pick list versions, or we've used a third-party pick list that we've rolled into our form because Salesforce's was not there yet. So, and now it's much better. So, and that's kind of an example of how things have evolved over the time that we started writing this guy. So.
I think there was a question or comment in the back, and then we'll go over to you. Yeah, you could see whatever you want to do.
So actually, you mentioned pick lists, and that was one of my question was like, with pick lists, trying to roll these things, you get all these weird things like if you have record type like things with record types and dependent pick lists. Have you run into that issue, and how have you solved for it in this particular
let me see
solution?
What we have here, because I have it in this guy. So with our pick list, we just use a set of describes to go in and pull that. And it doesn't, I'm trying to think, because I know we've come across it being available for the record type before, and I think I have probably some not nice comment on the idea exchange about why you don't have this. And I don't remember kind of what we did to get it. Do you remember?
Do you have a response?
So
See, he remembers
we
all
don't,
the stuff. I'm like,
we don't currently support that because of in Apex, you can't natively support just get the record types or pick list values for this record type. Obviously, you can do like call outs to like the Salesforce APIs to get that.
That's right.
As one option. If anyone
Chris,
has a better
can't
option.
you do that now? I think they added that.
Did they? That'd be good.
That would be awesome.
I think there's a way to do it now. It was added like.
So the only officially supported way of doing this is through the UI API, which you need to make a remote site setting to be able to make a call out to from Apex.
Wait, hang on, Chris. Hang on. That's all right. On Aura, that's true. The Lightning Web Components, that's now supported as a function. So there's a function on a Lightning Web Component called get record type values, and it will get the record type and get all the pick list values for the record type. So there's only two functions. They support like get record and then randomly get pick list values and get pick list values for a record type. So someone clearly got annoyed and said, well, all right, we'll deliver that for you. So that supported, field sets are not supported that way, which I assume they will eventually come that way. But so on, specifically on Lightning Web Components, if you've got that use case, that would be a use case to use those over Aura because it mysteriously has that function.
So is that built on the metadata API where you're making calls?
It's built on the user interface API, right? So if you look into the Lightning Web Component docs, you just see these two functions available to you.
Yeah, they've bridged the UI API into the LWC framework for that. It has not been bridged in anywhere else, and I am annoying a lot of people internally. And if that fails, I'm going to bribe somebody with a lot of cheeseburgers to help me understand the weird bit masks that need to be decoded so that I can build that myself because I'm tired of explaining this.
Love it.
Good, okay.
So I've seen this and we are...
Can you come a little closer?
Yeah, we are really in the same path. We had to do an abstract layer. The thing is that we tackle it using static resources and within JSONs. So within the JSON, we are not thinking about a field itself. We are thinking about items. And why that? And also regarding using the layout of the record, the thing is that we need, for usability, to be able to have a form like a wizard. We need steps. When we do need steps, we have section, rows, fields, and also lining components, as we do with Salesforce pages, because we have a more complex solution, right? And when we do a wizard, also you usually have contextual help of that step. So using page layouts is really difficult right now for that kind of forms of solutions. But the thing here is that we lose record types, we lose maybe doing some extensions. And maybe I was thinking with this talk about the custom metadata type. Maybe we could refer to different static resources depending on the record types or something like that. I don't know how it will work. But is the thing here, what I think is, it is very difficult for an administrator to be able to configure because we are always thinking about code in a way. A JSON, it's more readable, it's let you be more extensible than a field set. A field set has a quantity, a limit of characters also, right? And my thing is, also, if we are not going to be able to create dynamic components, what are we going to do with the Lightning Web Components then? How are we going to be able to be up to date with Salesforce?
Right. Yeah, it seems like that's a pretty big, not a short sight, but it's just not there yet, hopefully. Dan?
Do you have a response?
No, not a response. I had another question, but
Yeah,
please go ahead.
This is from an admin who knows enough of development to be dangerous, okay? Listening to this whole journey, my question is how much overhead of the different solutions, the different approaches came because perhaps requirements from the end user and playing with them to begin with, like giving them prototypes has nothing to do with code. Does this look right? How much does that play into it? Or is it always organic? Okay, we think we hear what you say, so you produce it, and you do all the coding, and they say, oh, well, we want to do this, and we want to do, I mean, one of my things as an administrator is, and being kind of an architect, how do I get those requirements before I give them a solution or a set of solutions? I don't know what your journey was, and it was a while ago, and the technology has changed. But that always seems to be the basis, is how do you get your and there's double. There's the administrator, there's the end user, and here's the developer saying, I still have to develop this so I can maintain it or have someone else. So there's 3 users, if you will.
Yeah.
So I just wonder how you guys approach that. I'm in a very small nonprofit. So it's like, 2 people here, 1 per, I've got it, okay? But you are talking, so I'd just like to get your opinion on how that happened.
Well,
That was my question, pretty much. So thank you.
Well, this kind of came, so when we wanted to present this out, we wanted our users, our end users, to not know. So we wanted to feed this in a way that looked the same to what they were used to. So now they're going through putting in their stuff into the fields, and they can't see the difference. So our admins are in here and are the real warriors, where they're getting their requirements, and they're making sure what we're giving them is a pleasing, or at least an equal to what we had before, and then better. Because we don't want to lose functionality that we had. We only want to continue to make their lives easier, right? So, but in that, it was also a very organic process, to where, we're developing it, and you kind of see it in the journey. We're like, well, Salesforce has dynamic help text. We'd like dynamic help text for our users too. So we were providing that functionality for them anyhow, but it was hard-coded in. So, or not hard-coded, but it was painfully coded in for each field that we need to have it or not. So that was kind of a pain point. So now, with it being dynamic and how it kind of was organically given in there I feel like I'm rambling, to present this product. So it kind of changes over time. Like, we keep adding stuff to it as we get new requirements, so it's backwards compatible, and then we can continue to move forward. So it continues to be this breathing thing.
I'll just chime in on that question as well. I think your question is an excellent one, because as a Salesforce consulting partner, I see this all the time, where the end user, could be business leader, could be the CEO, asks for a configuration change in Salesforce that makes absolutely no practical sense whatsoever. 0. Yet if I am wearing the hat of an admin, is it possible to add another open text field on the contact and calling it, let's say, name of spouse? Of course I can. As a developer, can I create some type of custom visual force page to put it on there? Of course I can. But I often turn back to the business leader who's asking the either what I'll call half-baked or nonsensical requirement, and they are phrasing it as a business requirement. We absolutely must have it. And if I personally think it makes no sense at all, I will turn to them and say, technically, sure, I can, but that makes about as much sense as buying a new Tesla and attaching a shopping cart to the back of it with duct tape just because you asked me, can I attach a shopping cart to the back of it with duct tape? Sure, technically I can. You would never, ever want someone who considers themselves a Salesforce professional to do that. So what I often see is an admin or developer that will often take quite literally the business requirements that are given. They might not be fully thought through, or there might be better practical solutions to solve for it. Yet the admin or the developer have the mindset of, I want to help. They're asking a question, I certainly know how to do that. I can deliver exactly what they are asking, and I will look like a winner. And that is a very dangerous path to pursue.
All right, let me ask then a tough and follow-up question, okay? Because you make a good point. As I think you've discovered, and every software developer knows, most of the cost of any piece of software is in the maintenance. It's not in the initial development. Looking now at what you've built, which by the way, as a software developer and a geek, I love this stuff. I just want to say for the record, I was wondering, what am I doing here in what I thought was an admin talk, and then suddenly you're looking at, oh, dynamic forms with field sets. I've done that. This is really cool. So technically, I love what you've done. But if you think now about the admin time you've saved and the cost of the development and maintaining and so on, if you could go back in time, could you cost justify this? Do you think it was worth the time and money invested, the benefits you got?
I do. I do think it is, because our forms are constantly changing, and they change so much that we have to go back. And what we had in our forms with all that show and hide dynamic stuff was that we would remove a field that was dependent in the JavaScript, and then the form breaks. But it would break silently, which is probably just poorly coded. So giving them that extra layer of being able to do this themselves, I think has helped across the board, because now not only do we do that in that form, we also do it in what we called a shopping cart. It's not called shopping cart, it's called marketplace. So we made this set of components, or this user experience, where users can go through and do a shopping cart experience for marketing materials. And with each of those materials, so we utilize field sets in the field set form to ask for dynamic information per a type of marketing material. So now all of that is just dynamically working as we pull in the applicable field set form for each of those materials, which would have been a nightmare to try to code in, because they have, how many field sets are they up to now? It's a lot. So that they're wanting all the specific information that they need to create these brochures. So utilizing it in that environment alone, I think saved us a ton of time. And it gives us a consistent user experience through the whole thing.
So your organization has actually benefited from reuse of this component in many different areas.
Yes, we use this. We use this all over the place, and kind of now our admins, every little form that we need, they're like, well, we want to use this field set, and I'll go build it for you. And then we have to go through and code it in, and kind of code in the wrapper and some of the submit logic and extra stuff with it, but they can say what they want on it and change it, and we do it. And pretty much all of our new development uses it now.
So have you considered doing a higher level component that takes its attributes, things like the field set name and so on, so you don't have to hard code any of it, and you can just drop it in place and maybe even make it configurable because you can expose those attributes?
That would be nice. Probably later down the road when we get there and keep evolving this. So, because right now, we still have a very manual process for showing or hiding the extra field sets. And if they want to show or hide based on a different field that we haven't coded for, we have to go in and code for it. And we code in like save logic, and if they want extra stuff done in that, we usually code that in. So we didn't code ourselves out of a job yet.
Next week.
Yeah.
Peter, before you go, just so everybody knows, if you have a question, you're welcome to get in line or just step up or what have you. So that's kind of the protocol. But go ahead.
No, I was actually going to ask the question that Dan asked, was like, was there any consideration of design attributes? Because I think some of the things you talked about around hiding fields in a very particular, like this component, iteration 1 should have this field, but iteration 2 should not. That sounds like a use case for design attributes, and I wonder whether, and I mean, I'm guilty of not using them very much either, but that feels like that is. I just wonder if there was a reason you didn't whether it's just a capacity question or whether you just didn't.
I thought about using design components for that to where we can configure it in the app builder, but there's so much customizations around the type of form that we put it in and where they, not necessarily where they want to put it, but like take this for example. If you want the field set form to truly be dynamic, you want to kind of leave it to where it's just the form, and then you still have the logic in your code. So I think it would be difficult to start doing all of the submit logic and all the different facets that they need to keep that into a meaningful one-stop shop for how we're going to submit the form or what we're going to do with it, as opposed to just showing the forms or the fields that we need in the field set. So I think you start moving into giving it too much logic as opposed to just keeping it as a reusable component. So I think you can kind of start getting into one-offs. Well, we're going to make a custom design component here, but then that's not going to fit all of your scenarios that you can use it for. But that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, so as I'm sitting there listening to it, the question I have is that, if the admins are able just to go and add and remove all these forms, I'm sure you guys have some, internal controls and things like that, but how do you ensure that, all the validation rules that are required for that object that it's operating on and or the processing logic that it gets submitted to is not getting a state that it's not, able to comply with or use?
Hopefully it would throw an error that like if it goes to the server and can't save because of validation rules, it's going to pop that up, which I don't know why it didn't work when I showed it. I tried to show that to you and it didn't work.
But is just like the require, are you having to wire up the fact that you want the validation rules to fire individually? And
The validation rules are going to work regardless because they fire whenever you save the record, like on the server. For the other ones, then I don't know. Do you have a good? I'm going to throw you under the bus.
Sure. The required logic that we're seeing was just to save like a round trip to the server.
Yes. Yeah, we don't.
So we're
go to
doing
server on those.
basically client-side validation in addition to server-side validation. So it was just to, for performance sake, and if it passes the client-side validation, then we're upserting or doing our DML on the Apex side. And if there's any validation errors from triggers or Apex or any other automation, then we're catching the DML exception. On the RS side, we're iterating over the page errors, the field level errors, and showing those errors in the appropriate place in the form. And that way, if there's any errors, we see them in a friendly way in the UI.
So that we're not silently failing again.
Right.
But if the admin goes in and adds a validation rule on, to hopefully not in production, so we've kind of squashed down on that. But should somebody do that, then it's not going to be caught beforehand. There's not going to be anything that's going to know, hey, well, this is being used here, and you're going to break it if you do this. So hopefully that's all being tested as it's being added so that it's caught in development before it ever gets pushed out to really break things.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. We have about 8 or 9 more minutes. Do we have any other questions? All right. Comments. Yes.
I have a comment. It's kind of I like this discussion about talking about other solutions and how else could you do it? And so it's got me thinking. And not that it's going to work in all these situations, but I wanted to bring it up as quick actions is a place like this particular example you have here. Quick action can do all of that.
Yeah.
And with Lightning, we can add that. We can add that as a component, so it doesn't have to be under a button. So I think it is. I love this discussion about.
I just did that
about,
for demo
right.
purposes.
Yeah. Quick actions definitely are going to have all these other things like adding required fields, but it does give you dependent pick lists. It gives you record type, pick lists. It gives you help text. So it gives you so if you need a simple form that you're I want a page layout, but I don't want to make a whole page layout. Look at quick actions because you can definitely do a lot with those. So.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Marisa?
Yes. So wonderful talk. One of the things that I've thought about listening to how you've come up with a solution is, have you thought about packaging all of this for your org? I'm an ISV, so I think about how I would implement this in my app. Is that something that you've thought about?
No. I've been a corporation developer for a long time. Though with this, I've thought it'd be really cool too, but I just haven't. So.
Does anybody have any other thoughts on
yeah.
what this would look like?
You more ISV people.
Yeah.
This could make a nice use case for unlocked packages so that you can easily deploy it to sandboxes and upgrade it and things like that and isolate that piece of code.
We we do package our solution, right? So when we are using JSON, there the good thing is that we can read more configuration rather than a field set. So we can let the user create a static resource that is some package and then read over there and read like an override configuration and do some custom things in that specific client. That could maybe work, something like that.
Okay.
I don't know.
I actually have an unmanaged package for like different prototypes of this. If you just Google Fieldset form, you'll find some of that and some open source kind of starter code. It's, just kind of proof of concept with a lot of this stuff. There's a GitHub repo on this. I know some developers, like, if you go the managed package route, you kind of have to have extensibility points to extend it. So some people elect to, well, if I can just use Andy Fawcett's deployment tool, you can just push the code into your org and then modify depending on how you want to distribute it. So there's just a couple more options.
Which made me suddenly think of one other question, which is how do you test this? It's like if you can just add fields on everywhere,
Another
you
guy
can
beat
just
me to the question.
like you're saying forms like having problems today. It's like that must be a hell of a QA job. I mean, how do you know that people haven't just added some random field that you can't control?
Well, we have a small subset of admins, so hopefully they're not doing a lot of crazy stuff.
So it's one of those orgs where everyone is not an admin?
Yes, we only have a few. Thank goodness. I would probably cry if everybody. So we're pretty. We lock down a lot of stuff to our users. We try to. What was the question?
Testing.
How do you
I
test?
test it. So we've really just done, to my knowledge, just Apex testing for the code itself, where we're just throwing it in like a test field set. So what's actually being shown or what's already implemented, I can't say that we test right now. So is that true? False? Maybe? He's standing up. See, he knows more about
We manually test, and since it's the same code, and we only have a few admins, and we go through a very rigorous deployment process to control what gets released. That's how we kind of control it.
Yeah.
From development into production.
Yeah, we don't let our users.
So it's more about the internal change management business process and less about the technical Apex or Visual Force or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd wrap up with a prognostication question, which is where do you go from here? What does this become next? How are you going to use it or expand it?
Well, I know that, which kind of rained on my parade with Lightning Web Components not being dynamic. So, I was thinking of trying to move it into the new hotness with Lightning Web Components, but quite frankly, it's a terrifying prospect. But so what we're doing now, we're just trying to keep making this as dynamic and flexible as we can. Though I do think that today has given us some great ideas and other options to explore. Do I think we're going to start over right now? Probably not. But I think it's great to know, and there's been other use cases where he's built an email builder with fields from Marketing Cloud, which is really cool. And it uses a lot of the same format for how we're building our dynamic fields. So as we do that, we can go through and look at all the different solutions that Salesforce is offering us to see if we can even make a better solution than what we have today. So, but I know as of right now, as our admins ask for things, we keep trying to incorporate them in and to keep backwards compatibility, but still make a pleasing form that we can do a lot of cool stuff with, as if it wasn't all driven on a field set from the admins, all dynamic. So.
Another thing is with the new flow builder, came out in spring, and all of the streamlined capabilities, still building multi-step wizards with flows is still kind of a painful process. And to ease that, we were thinking maybe we could expand our Fieldset forms to support flows. So we can embed them in different screens in the flow process and make it a lot easier to build screen forms and flows that are driven by field sets or other supported, or maybe custom metadata types or other just metadata, to overcome some of the limitations within flows, such as record types and pick lists and other things like that.
Yes.
I have one follow-up, one quick one.
No, it's perfect. We have time for one more.
One
so-
more, okay.
Yeah.
So is this responsive? And by what I mean is what we're seeing is everything on my phone, not the laptop, not even I mean, it's like phone. And is this functionality, does it display well? Does it do it well? Or is this built for someone who is using, because that's what we're finding right now, is that our use case, part of our requirements are, do you need it on your phone? Almost more than, can you do this? It's like, how does it look on my phone?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Most of the stuff we've built for it to be screen generated, because our company doesn't support you to be using it on your phone or on the iPad. Though we have moved over to make sure that our mobile version is looking pleasing, and I haven't heard that it doesn't look good. So, do you know how it looks, Sarah? Maybe.
Uh-oh.
Not so great. Yeah. So.
For now, we are trying to optimize it for the mobile So we are trying to optimize it for the mobile device. I would say current state, no. And so we don't choose to show those forms within the mobile device because they're entering in a ton of information and important information, and that user experience is not great. So we don't want it. But yes, I agree. The forms, if they're not long and extensive, you would want them to be on the mobile device.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for such a great presentation, and everyone for your questions.
That was really good.
We're still up here if you have any more.
Thank you. I know, I'm
Be on the slide.